Okay, hello and welcome to this FIIA Spotlight webinar on energy transition. And today we will be talking about India's low carbon transition from critical minerals to nuclear power is the topic. We will start now slowly because I know that there are still people coming in. But I will give you a bit of a background on what we're doing today and present the speakers, and then we'll get started. So my name is Emma Hakala. I'm a leading researcher here at FIIA, and I will be moderating the webinar today. And we have great speakers whom I will introduce in a moment. But basically, just to give you an idea of what we're going to do today, we'll be talking about the renewable energy sector in India, especially and overall India's energy transition and how different sort of energy sources relate to it. We know that India is a major emerging power, especially in renewable energy production, and it has the sort of added advantage because it has several or considerable domestic reserves of critical materials, which are crucial for the renewable production. And this, of course, means that India not only has the means to innovate and further develop its energy sector, but also to somehow use it to boost its own geostrategic position and its competition with other players in the field. Then at the same time, the country has vast investments on nuclear energy, which supports this potential for low carbon production. So in this webinar, we will consider these questions, how they, first of all, or how India is working towards securing resilient and self-reliant supply chains for critical minerals, and how it is using its international partnerships to promote clean energy, but also its geostrategic aspirations. We'll also talk about how India's relations kind of relate to its, or its energy relations relate to its other objectives and interests with other great powers, such as especially China. And also maybe we'll consider how and to what extent renewable energy is also an issue of national security. So we'll have, as I said, excellent speakers. First of all, we have Dr. Dhanashree Jayaram, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations and co-coordinator for the Center of Climate Studies in Manipal Academy for Higher Education. Her research interests are, and also teaching themes are on environmental security, international relations theory, and critical geopolitics, among other things. And she is also an affiliated fellow at FIIA. Then we have Dr. Ramu CM, who is a senior geopolitical analyst at APAC Assistance, which is a boutique risk management firm in Singapore. And his core research areas are on geopolitics and geoeconomics of energy infrastructures across Eurasian region. And then last but not least, we have Pallavi Pal, who is a doctoral researcher at Tampere University, who is working on her doctoral dissertation on Russia's nuclear energy diplomacy vis-a-vis India. And her research interests are on nuclear energy technology by Russia and overall understanding nuclear energy from the perspective of social sciences. So I think we'll have very good and interesting perspectives on this topic. And before I let the speakers speak, I will also mention that Dhanashree and Ramu have just published very recently a paper, a FIIA briefing paper on these topics on India's critical minerals strategy, geopolitical imperatives and energy transition goals. And you can find it on the FIIA website, but I can also actually link it in the chat. But yes, without further ado, I'll maybe let Dhanashree start with your presentation. So, and just for the audience, you can write your questions or comments in the chat, and I will then pick them up from there and place them to to the presenters. So please go ahead, Anasreen.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emma, and hello to everyone joining this webinar on India's energy transition goals from critical minerals to nuclear energy. So it's a topic that is of extreme importance for a country like India, whose energy requirements are rising, and at the same time, emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions, are growing as well at an accelerated pace. So I will just share my presentation right now, so that we can go just a second. I hope it's visible. I'll expand it. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Thank you. So what I'm going to do very briefly is to set the stage for the discussion today, which is broadly about India's low carbon transition or energy transition, and what are the geopolitical imperatives, what are the domestic imperatives, and how the transition processes are taking place, and what are the various pathways that India has chosen to achieve its climate goals, and at the same time its energy goals. Because in India's case, what is very clear is that energy and climate goals are intertwined with each other, especially because India's energy requirements are also growing at a much faster pace, and it's a highly coal dependent economy. Um, so, so to start with, I just wanted to show these figures, which kind of indicate where India is. And as Emma mentioned, India is one of the largest, countries, countries which has installed one of the largest amounts of renewable energy capacity over the past decade. It has grown manifold over the past decade, as you can see from the cumulative achievements that is very clear from the image, the graph that is on the top left. And what is also important to understand is that the energy sector, which constitutes, of course, many different sectors, contribute the largest to the greenhouse gas emissions of the country, whether it is the power sector, which is highly dependent on coal. The manufacturing or the industrial sector obviously is another major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, which again is highly dependent on coal. The transportation sector, which is also one of the largest emitters, is more dependent on, of course, oil, the crude oil, and its various products, petroleum products. Now, out of all these, of course, coal is the one issue which is very dominant in India's energy transition discussions. And that is very clear in terms of the importance of coal for India's primary energy supply. And it's almost 60%. And if you look at the actual contribution to the electricity, it still is around 70% or so. So this is something that India is quite wary of, even when we talk about our climate goals and how to intertwine it with the energy goals, so that there is, the energy goals are not compromised at any cost. Now, these are some of India's climate action targets and policies, and some of these are enshrined in the updated nationally determined contribution, which was announced in 2022. Before that, of course, the Prime Minister of the country also announced a net zero target at the Glasgow summit in 2021. So some of the targets include reducing emissions intensity of its GDP by 45%, then achieving about 50% of cumulative electric power installed capacity from non-fossil fuel-based sources. This includes, of course, also not just renewable energy like solar, wind, etc. It also includes nuclear energy, and also to generate 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel installed power generation capacity by 2030, which is one of the most ambitious targets that India has set so far when it comes to its renewable energy or clean energy goals. And the updated NDC clearly states that that these pathways essentially will lead India to reach net zero by 2070. Now, the year 2070 is something that has been debated and discussed a lot, and this is something that we can, of course, come to later on if needed. But essentially, what we also need to understand is that within the country, even if the overall target is 2070, within India, many subnational actors, including states, some of the industries and various other actors have in fact gone ahead and declared net zero targets, which is well ahead of 2070. Like the Indian Railways has declared 2030, and we have also other states like Kerala and others who have said 2050, and so on and so forth. Some industries also have declared 2050, also because of their linkages with the industries from outside of India. I mean, there are many, many policies that have been introduced by the government over the past decade. The National Action Plan on Climate Change was introduced back in 2007-8. Of course, this is like the Apex plan, which includes several missions, including solar mission, and off late wind mission has also been added, and various other missions primarily look at like energy related missions, like energy efficiency is another one. In addition to that, what this Apex plan on climate change also does is to sort of lay the groundwork for states, because India is a federal country, a quasi-federal country, with states having their own action plans on climate change, which is very critical to achieve India's targets. And some of the policies, the recent ones that have been introduced includes like Energy Conservation Act, which is an amendment act. The original one was introduced in 2001. The National Green Hydrogen Mission, the Carbon Trading Scheme, which was recently announced in 2023. And of course, in the transportation sector, a different set of policies, which includes electric mobility mission plan and battery storage, which has been also seeing a lot of investments of late. And also this particular policy called faster adoption and manufacturing of electric vehicles, which is focused on increasing the manufacturing of these of electric vehicles and batteries in India. So what I was talking about the subnational actors, I think it is very important to identify who are the subnational actors and see how are they also part of this entire climate and energy transition story that we are talking about. Of course, even here you have some states which are performing better. Some of the better ones are Rajasthan, Gujarat, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra. These are some of the states which have done better than others, and those are the dark green spots in the map, while others are still lagging well behind. And of course, we have discussions on just energy transitions because we have states like Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and others which are highly coal dependent. So hence, there is also a need to discuss just energy transitions, which will look at how states can diversify their economies, how coal industry can also develop missions or develop policies to diversify and also invest in green jobs, which is something that is also happening to a large extent. It's important to also highlight that the industries are also getting on board slowly, and net zero in particular, or near zero emission ambition is something that is becoming like a clarion call for many industries to forge policies on climate change and at least, strengthen its own ESG norms, which is also interesting to see. Particularly the hard to abate sectors like iron and steel, aluminium, etc., are also joining the bandwagon slowly, even though, there are many challenges ahead of them. Internationally, of course, India has committed to several actions. This includes the International Solar Alliance is perhaps one of the most successful models of diplomacy that India has embarked upon since 2015. And many policies or many programs or missions have been introduced under the Solar Alliance, which also includes, around 100 countries, around 100 odd countries, which have also committed to invest in solar solutions, help in joint collaboration, especially on issues such as solar storage, solar rooftop, mini grids, etc., which also helps with the decentralization process. The other major achievement, particularly that happened last year, was also the launch of the Global Biofuels Alliance, which is another effort to really kickstart this international cooperation that could happen on cooperation on biofuels. Life is another mission that was introduced a couple of years ago. It was launched at the Sharm el-Sheikh Summit, which essentially talks about energy efficiency, reducing energy consumption, and so on and so forth, which is also something that looks at the sustainability of our lifestyles, primarily also looking at households and also industries and various other sectors. And this is India's low carbon development strategy, which was introduced, again, launched a couple of years ago, which includes plans like low carbon development of electricity systems, transport system. It includes carbon dioxide removal and related engineering solutions, which is something that also India wants to get on. And of course, focusing on the need to have economic and financial sort of investments into these sectors more than ever before. I will try to wrap up with this slide so that there's also more time for discussion. So over here, what I'm also trying to highlight is that we have many instances of how India is also trying to cooperate with partners, with like-minded partners, and with with partners across the world. And primarily, we can see examples of India, EU, for instance. There is a clean energy and climate partnership under which many different programs and working groups have been active, including green hydrogen mission, which is something where in EU and some countries within the EU have taken the leap in sort of strengthening the collaboration and partnership. There is also US-India, the partnership, which is called PACE. Again, this looks at clean energy investments. And of course, there was a time when there was a brief lull during the Trump administration. But overall, what we can see is that there is increasing sort of interest in also strengthening this. Under the G20 presidency, India, last year in 2023, India also emphasize the need for South-South cooperation on energy transition, which is something that I'm sure Ramu will also speak about some of the aspects, particularly in critical minerals, and also when it comes to biofuels alliance or international solar alliance, for instance. The South-South cooperation is a very important component of this cooperation. And lastly, I would also like to highlight some of the newer sort of partnerships that India is entering into, especially with Quad, which includes India, Japan, Australia, and the United States. And it has introduced something called the Q-Champ, which is focusing on both mitigation and adaptation to climate change. And some of the initiatives taken under this Q-Champ initiative includes the Quad Shipping Task Force, aiming for a shared green corridor framework. There is also knowledge sharing on clean hydrogen and CCUS and carbon recycling technologies, and so on and so forth, including like carbon markets, the Article 6 implementation of the Paris Agreement, for instance. So these are some of the initiatives which also show that there are these partnerships that India is building at the international level, which also kind of supplements and complements what is going on at the subnational level with the kind of efforts that are being made, including with some of the subnational actors like the states and also industries. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dhanasree. That was really interesting, and I realized that I kind of forgot to explain how we will proceed with this webinar, so that you give the general introduction basically to the topic. And then Ramu will now focus more on the minerals, critical minerals, and then Pallavi will talk about nuclear energy. But we'll actually let Ramu now straight away go into his presentations, and then see if we have some immediate reactions from the audience after that. So go ahead, Ramu.
All right. Thank you, Emma. Thanks, Dhanasree, for putting a broader perspective about what I'm going to speak about right now. Let me share my presentation. Yeah. All right. So good afternoon, everyone. Dhanasree just gave you a broader idea about what India's energy transition goals are in the entire decarbonization framework in terms of bridging the gap between countries in the global north and the global south. So I will come to the crux of this, this discussion, which is based on the paper that Dhanasri and I had written a few weeks back. So about India's critical mineral strategy and how it is influenced by external geopolitical drivers as well as certain internal domestic determinants. So yeah, I mean, so I don't have to give a broad overview about the importance of critical minerals, because it's something that we are all quite aware of in the current context, also in terms of the emerging industries such as high tech electronics, telecommunication, defense, and most importantly, what is more relevant to this conversation, it's about renewable energy technology. So most of these critical minerals are an integral part of renewable energy technologies, be it solar cells or solar modules, wind turbines, and whatnot. So, and some of the examples of the most commonly required critical minerals, as you all know, is lithium, cobalt, then you have nickel, and then you have other rare earth elements. So in this presentation, I shall discuss India's strategy for securing critical minerals. Then I will examine the geopolitical and domestic drivers that are influencing this particular strategy. So yeah, so what are critical minerals? I mean, these are vital for the sustainable economic development and national security of any country for that matter. Because in the current context of the green transition, which is premised on decarbonization and the electrification of the grid, the critical minerals have taken the front seat in terms of being the backbone of this particular transition. I mean, you don't have to go into the complicated, like terms such as, molybdenum or like those rare earth elements. I mean, just for that matter, just take copper, for example, to build any kind of transmission infrastructure, even high tension electricity transmission infrastructure, you need copper. Copper is like vital in terms of having the right infrastructure to transmit energy or process energy, electricity from point A to point B with minimum resistance, or minimum attenuation due to heat. But the problem is, so far, in the race for critical minerals, I mean, there has been a lot of vulnerabilities that are actually like slowly getting exposed with the current geopolitical equation. I mean, with some pundits also talking about a Cold War 2.0 between the United States and China, and how most of the supply chains, the critical mineral supply chains, starting from the mining to the extraction, processing, as well as retail, is in the hands of companies that are based in China. So what are the key minerals that are required for India? So we'll talk about lithium, cobalt, nickel, copper again, and rare earth elements, which are mostly used for the defense as well as like the nuclear power sector. Yeah. So to give you a basic idea about what the strategy is, I mean, I will not elaborate much upon it. I mean, I invite the audience to ask me to flag off with questions if you need particular elaboration about which institutions are in charge of what and how exactly this strategy works in different layers. But I just flag off the points over here. So what are the components of the strategy? So it's first is domestic exploration and development. So India wishes to augment its domestic reserves of critical minerals. So it has recently auctioned at least 20 different mineral blocks across its subcontinental geography. As you can see in the picture towards the left, I mean, so that is where like some of the most important critical minerals are disseminated across the country. So there are challenges in terms of the very diverse geography and the population dividend. But at the same time, the government is trying to bring in more collaboration from the private sector in order to extract these minerals. Then there is a focus on sustainable mining practices by conforming to rather rigorous environmental standards without like violating different regulations that are applicable to certain subnational stakeholders like different states and different communities. Then there is a focus on enhancing the investment in research and development, especially like bringing in academic institutions, even pure research institutions, to collaborate with the public sector undertakings as well as the private industry. Then India is trying to build strategic partnerships with those countries which are either rich in terms of mineral reserves, or those countries that have the experience and expertise with mineral extraction technologies and mineral processing technologies. Then one of the major geopolitical drivers in terms of diversifying the source of the importation of these minerals is to reduce the dependency on Chinese companies that have a literal 90% monopoly over the extraction as well as the refining of most of these critical minerals. Then the government is trying to create strategic reserves in terms of stockpiling most of these strategic minerals in terms of a geopolitical event, a price shock or whatnot. Just like, just following suit from India's strategy in the fossil fuel sector, like building strategic petroleum reserves. India is also thinking of having a repository for strategic reserves that are crucial to its industrial development. Although this is in its embryonic stages, there is an emphasis on boosting recycling, because many of these critical minerals come with its own environmental side effects as well as health-related hazards and externalities. So there is a focus on improving collaboration to enhance recycling of these critical minerals, and also to promote a circular economy wherein even those critical minerals that are embedded in electronic products or any kind of high-end technology devices are not going out of the value chain, that it is actually like recycled and being used again. So this infographic will give you a broader, kind of an illustration of what exactly I just talked about. So what are the three stages of approaching this mineral, like how a mineral can be determined as critical to India's energy needs. So stage one is reviewing critical mineral strategies of other countries, which I already mentioned, that have an expertise on or that have kind of an industry that is already developed in this particular sector, like the United States, Japan, or Australia for that matter. Then to bring in more inter-ministerial consultation, because in India there are different ministries that actually hitherto didn't work in consonance with each other. So they were mostly working in silos. So you have the power ministry, you have the Ministry of Mines, you have the Ministry of Earth Sciences, you have other ministries like Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Ministry of Petroleum. All these are quite different. So we need to actually like bring in a synergy of interests in terms of bridging the gap between collaboration, between these different departments as well as ministries. So and then stage three is about evaluating mineral criticality. So so there is a lot of coordination and cooperation with the International Energy Agency in terms of especially between think tanks in India. Like there's a think tank called Center for Environment, Energy and Water. So it is collaborating a lot with the International Energy Agency, coming up with policy briefs, research papers and all to determine what exactly, like how exactly the criticality of a mineral can be determined in the context of India. So there have been a lot of initiatives that have been undertaken in order to improve collaboration with international stakeholders. So you can actually see some of the initiatives. So number one, the one one joint venture company which I wish to talk about is it's an acronym. It's called CABIL, which is short for Khanij Bidesh Limited. So it is actually a joint venture floated between different companies in India, public sector mining companies. Like you have the National Aluminium Company, you have the Hindustan Copper Limited, and you have the Mineral Exploration Corporation Limited. So these three companies came together to buy equity assets in different critical minerals in other countries where these mineral reserves are found in abundant quantities. So as part of the Kabil venture, like India signed in 2022, India signed a cooperation framework with Australia to collaborate in terms of sharing mining technology, technological know-how, expertise, and also in terms of identifying and acquiring certain equity mineral assets in Australia. Just in January this year, India signed a similar framework with Argentina, another country which is rich in minerals like cobalt, copper, and nickel. Then India has recently joined the US-led Mineral Security Partnership, which is a kind of a framework, which aims to bring in like-minded countries to boost their resilience in safeguarding the critical mineral supply chain, to promote more sustainable and responsible methodologies in mining practices, and also to ensure there is a diversity or a diversification of mineral sources. I mean, mostly focused on trying to de-risk away from Chinese supply chains. Then it has created like different centers of excellence for critical minerals in collaboration with some of the state-of-the-art universities and research institutes in India, like the Indian Institute of Technology, Indian Institute of Mines, and whatnot. And also, India is focusing on developing the critical minerals that are found in its exclusive economic zone in the offshore regions, as well as in the continental, in the continental margin, which is like somewhere in the margin between the continental bed, the continental margin, as well as the deep seas. So, because most of the minerals that are found in the deep seas in this region are of higher grade than those that are found in the terrestrial zones. But still, I mean, like, it's still not deep sea mining. It is still in its very nascent stages. It's still about deep sea mineral exploration, wherein the International Seabed Authority is allocating blocks for countries to explore and to find the possibility of extracting these minerals in the future, in the foreseeable future. Then India has amended its Mines and Minerals Amendment Bill to kind of dehyphenate some of the critical minerals away from atomic minerals, because for a long time the nuclear power sector is mostly it is sensitive, and it is not so much open to yeah, it's not available in the open source domain much, but the government is trying to make a concerted effort to dehyphenate some of these minerals so as to streamline the process of inviting external stakeholders to explore for these other critical minerals. So yeah, these are the geopolitical determinants. I'll just like flag it off again. So mostly the aim is to de-risk from China's dominance in critical mineral supply chains. Then to build diverse and resilient supply sources by collaborating with countries both in the global north and the global south. Then you have international trade policies, like what I had actually mentioned about these different strategic partnerships that are actually signed with international stakeholders. Then to boost technological and industrial policy, because India still is dependent on a lot of external service providers, international service providers, be it in mining technology or be it even in ore processing, like metallurgical technology. So the problem is, even if you go to any of the open cast mines in India, like you have machinery that are mostly operated by a company such as Caterpillar, which is American, or like a company like Siemens, which is German. So most of these companies that are actually involved in earth moving machinery, or even in terms of metallurgical processing of the ore, because these minerals that are found in rocks, they don't exist, they exist in association with other minerals. So it has to be separated through, extreme, exothermic industrial processes. So you need collaboration with companies and countries, that have the expertise in these technologies. And then finally, in terms of environmental and regulatory factors, because India, again, like it looks like a federal structure. I mean, India it calls itself a union, but it's a quasi-federal structure wherein different states have its own rules when it comes to even some of these sensitive and critical minerals. So the central government as well as the respective state governments are trying to bring in more collaboration so that they can actually cut through the red tape and invite more private sector participants and even international stakeholders to participate in the mineral extraction process. Then yeah, the domestic drivers, I mean, critical minerals are essential for technological advancements and economic growth, mostly in the the clean energy domain, where India right now is fourth in terms of the renewable energy generation capacity. And it is trying to, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, it is trying to weave itself away from its dependence on Chinese like critical minerals processing chain. So in terms of boosting, domestic participation in manufacturing solar cells and solar modules, there is a need to bring in more, how would I put it, like import tariffs. I mean, it might appear as protectionist, but in a way, kind of balancing between promoting your indigenous players, indigenous stakeholders, and also in terms of preventing Chinese companies from furthering their monopoly over Indian renewable energy interests. Then again, like net zero emission targets, I'm not going to explain it because Anasya has already talked about it. Strategic autonomy, because India wants to leave a mark in its own way. So it has to reduce its dependency on imports, especially from China again. And again, to boost jobs. I mean, employment is it's a common agenda among any government in the world, you take it. So it needs to boost local mining and processing industry so as to create more employment opportunities. So I can see Emma on the screen. So I mean, she's asking me to stop. So I mean, you can actually go through this, the challenges and opportunities. So most of it is technological and infrastructure gaps, because there is still a lot of bureaucracy involved in terms of bringing in external participation. So most of these collaborative ventures are written in paper, but in order to translate into reality, it will take more time. So India has to iron out, the government has to create departments to actually iron out this process and cut through the red tape. Environmental concerns, like it is a vast geography with very diverse populations, diverse ethnic, like demographic dividend. So that again, makes it difficult to actually venture into certain territories, especially mineral rich belts, to go and explore for these minerals. Geopolitical risks associated with maritime trade routes and choke points, like the dependence on the Strait of Malacca, or even for that matter in conflict-prone countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, or for that matter in Afghanistan, where you have evidence of minerals, but it can't be extracted for socio-political and other external geopolitical reasons. Opportunities, yes, I mean, because as I mentioned, this would actually bring in more investments in terms of India's renewable energy progress. I mean, because although India still depends a lot on its coal reserves, I mean, it is also trying to bridge the gap by augmenting its renewable energy capacity. So critical minerals are very imperative in this process. So yeah, I mean, I'm going to end with this, because what I'm going to conclude is more or less the same as what it's like summarizing whatever I've talked about right now. So thank you so much for listening to me patiently.
Thank you, Ramu. That was really interesting, and I'm sure we could have listened to that for hours, but unfortunately we don't have that much time at the moment. I don't see any immediate reactions from the audience, so we could perhaps do so that we go directly into Pallavi's presentation on the nuclear side, and then we start the discussion in general. So please, Pallavi, go ahead.
Thank you, Emma. Hello, everybody. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to be as clear in my speech as possible. If there is any confusion or anything that is not clear, I hope to come back to it in the discussion. So I'll be talking about India's nuclear energy sector and role of nuclear energy in achieving India's net zero carbon emission target. Now, I'm a researcher approaching the study of nuclear energy from international relations perspective. I say this because I'm not an historian. However, a brief historical background is necessary to understand India's nuclear energy sector. This is the historical background from the time of the formation of the nation state of India. Almost 7 years post India's independence, on 10th May 1954, during a discussion in the lower house of the parliament, the first Prime Minister of independent India, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, was of the opinion that it is the bomb aspect which is warping the attitude and blinding the great possibility of utilization of atomic energy for peaceful purposes. Meghnad Shah, a renowned astrophysicist and in whose name the Meghnad Shah Institute of Nuclear Physics was established, was of the opinion that the quantity of uranium is so limited that if left to nations to exploit, then it leaves it open to be used for the production of destructive weapons with potential to destroy human civilization. Instead, he suggested bringing the whole of this raw material into an international pool, as only then will it be used for the best purposes for which human nature is willing to adopt it. Now, Jawaharlal Nehru understood that this approach to the problem of control would have vital consequences and is a political problem. He had no doubt that atomic energy can be used for peaceful purposes to the advantage of humanity. He was, however, not in favor of an international control, as he feared that the countries with adequate power resources would restrain and restrict the use of atomic energy to others. He believed that atomic energy for peaceful purposes is far more important to the underdeveloped countries of the world than to the developed countries. It was understood that atomic energy had special requirements because it was a new form of energy. It was very strategic in nature of its activities, and its international and political significance were not to be ignored, rather had to be constantly kept in mind. In view of the rapid strides in research and development in the peaceful uses of atomic energy, a greatly expanded program was envisaged in 1954, which could enable the country to produce all the basic materials required for the utilization of this energy and construct a series of atomic power stations, which was hoped to contribute increasingly to the generation of power. These special requirements of atomic energy, the newness of the field, the strategic nature of its activities, and its international and political significance had to be borne in mind in establishing such an organization. Following this, the government of India decided then to establish an Atomic Energy Commission with full executive and financial powers, thus replacing the Atomic Energy Commission set up in 1948. At present, and until the laws are changed to allow private entry, all civil nuclear facilities are owned and must be majority owned by the central government. Now about India's net zero carbon emission target, it will help understand why nuclear energy is important in the energy mix for India. At the 26th session of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in November 2021, India announced its target to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2070. In recognition of paragraph 19 of Article 4 of the Paris Agreement, India had submitted its long-term low-carbon development strategy to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which reaffirms the goal of reaching net zero by 2070. Now, according to a report prepared for the Indian government and launched on 3rd April in New Delhi last month, India can achieve clean, affordable electricity and become net zero by 2070. However, this would require substantial nuclear power and renewable energy to do this. This report is titled Synchronizing Energy Transitions Towards Possible Net Zero for India, Affordable and Clean Energy for All. This was launched by the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India, Ajay Kumar Sood, on 3rd April. In the making of this report, the expert group included representatives from the coal, nuclear, solar, wind, and biofuels generation sectors. India is projecting its biggest power shortfall in 14 years in June, following a slump in hydropower generation, and is racing to avoid outages by deferring planned plant maintenance and reopening idled units. A peak shortage of 14 gigawatt is forecast in June during nighttime hours when solar capacity is offline, according to the Central Electricity Authority, which is the country's planning body for the power sector. Government of India has asked companies to operate underutilized gas-based power plants in May and June and extend operations of imported coal-based plants until October 15th in order to meet the anticipated high demand for electricity. Power Minister R.K. Singh held an emergency meeting in the first week of May to take stock of the situation and decided to defer shutting down power plants for planned maintenance during June and revive 5 gigawatt of idled coal plant capacity. It was said that the existing coal-fired power plants and solar plants will help the nation to meet its electricity demand. Thus, with regard to the ongoing energy crisis in India, the report provides a push towards nuclear energy, an area where the government's commitment is not considered intensive enough. It concludes that no net zero is possible without substantial nuclear power generation in 2070. I will now discuss the nuclear energy sector of India by understanding using 4 broad themes here, namely finance, ecological, resource, and institutional. I will talk about these in the current context, starting with finance. The Federal Department of Atomic Energy and state-run Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited had held multiple rounds of discussions with the private companies in the past year on an investment plan. The government is in talks with at least 5 private firms, namely Reliance Industries, Tata Power, Adani Power, and Vedanta Limited, for an investment of around 440 billion rupees, which is $5.3 billion each. This is the first time New Delhi is pursuing private investment in nuclear power, a non-carbon emitting energy source whose current contribution is less than 2% of India's total electricity generation. The funding would help India to achieve its target of having 50% of its installed electric generation capacity use non-fossil fuels by 2030, up from 42% now. With the investment, the government hopes to build 11,000 megawatts of new nuclear power generation capacity by 2040. Indian law bars private companies from setting up nuclear power plants, but allows them to supply components, equipment, and sign construction contracts for work outside of the reactors. Under the funding plan, the private companies will make the investments in the nuclear plants, acquire land, water, and undertake construction in areas outside the reactor complex of the plants. However, the rights to build and run the stations and their fuel management will rest with Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited. This hybrid model of nuclear power project development is considered to be an innovative solution to accelerate the nuclear capacity. The private companies are expected to earn revenue from the power plant's electricity sales, and Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, which I'll henceforth refer to as NPCIL, would operate the projects for a fee. This plan will not require any amendment to the India's Atomic Energy Act of 1962, but will need a final go-ahead from the Department of Atomic Energy. NPCIL owns and operates India's current fleet of nuclear power plants with a capacity of 7,500 megawatt and has committed investments for another 13,000 megawatt. India has deferred a target to add 20,000 megawatt of nuclear power from 2020 to 2030. New Delhi has not met its nuclear power capacity addition targets for years, mainly because it could not procure nuclear fuel supplies. In 2010, however, this changed as India struck a deal with the United States for supplies of reprocessed nuclear fuel. India's stringent nuclear compensation laws have hampered talks with foreign power plant builders such as the General Electric and Westinghouse. Ecological. At the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP26, conference in Glasgow in November 2021, Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, pledged that India would achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2070. In order to achieve this goal, the report by the principal scientific advisor notes that India's electricity sector will need to decarbonize much before 2070. It formulates that the country can achieve clean and affordable electricity under 4 different net zero pathways and maps out its future energy requirements under 7 alternative scenarios, ranging from low to high economic growth, aligned with India's ambition of achieving the status of a developed country by 2047. Resource. Coal is projected to continue for the next 2 decades as the backbone of Indian energy system. However, nuclear power generation forms a substantial portion in all of the net zero pathways. As per the report, slowly but surely, non-fossil energy, renewable and nuclear, needs to replace the fossil fuels share. It notes that net zero is a challenge for India. Multiple transitions have to happen almost simultaneously across energy supply and end-use sectors. No net zero is possible without substantial nuclear power generation in 2070. This requires significant investments in research development and large-scale deployment of nuclear energy technologies. The report suggested that the establishment of a carbon price in India could generate further funds to fill the investment gap in achieving the nuclear thrust. As per the recommendations, a level playing field for all low carbon technologies with new innovative finance and or transition finance mechanisms to avoid preferential treatment for any technology and life cycle assessments for all alternative energy systems is called for. Trade bans and India's lack of indigenous uranium have hampered nuclear energy's momentum in the past until the more recent opening of the civil international uranium trade. The recommendations also include commissioning of uranium storage facilities to allow for resilience. The institutional arrangements may be scaled up so that more nuclear power could be commissioned easily and early. This may include public-private partnerships. Special economic zones could be set up in areas where the nuclear power or hydrogen cogeneration can take place alongside industrial operators with large demand for these commodities. Institutional activities related to atomic energy are governed by the Atomic Energy Act 1962. The commercial nuclear power program of the first stage, comprising of pressurized heavy water reactors and imported light water reactors, was implemented by the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, NPCIL, as seen in the case of Kudankulam Nuclear Power Plant 1 and 2, the reactor design of which was assigned to Atomenergo Project and was designed by Gidropress, a nodal agency part of Rosatom, the Russian state nuclear energy agency. On the second stage, comprising of fast breeder reactors, will be implemented by Bharatiya Nabhikiya Vidyut Nigam Limited. Henceforth, I'll refer to it as Bhavini. Both NPCIL and Bhavini are owned fully by the Union government in accordance with the provisions of the Atomic Energy Act of 1962. Now, the Indian nuclear energy program is characterized by a high degree of both horizontal and vertical aggregation. The Atomic Energy Commission is the central planning body for the nuclear energy program. The Atomic Energy Regulatory Board and the Department of Atomic Energy fall under the purview of the Atomic Energy Commission. The former, which is the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board, is the safety regulatory body, while the subsidiaries of the latter, that is the Department of Atomic Energy, carry out research and development, reactor construction and operation, and fuel activities. Bhavini, NPCIL, Uranium Corporation of India Limited, and the Nuclear Fuel Complex are the subsidiaries of the Department of Atomic Energy. Of this, Bhavini and NPCIL play multiple roles. They are the designers, architect, and engineers and operators of fast breeder and light water reactors, respectively. Bhava Atomic Research Center, Indira Gandhi Center for Atomic Research, and Board of Radiation and Isotope Technology are the research and development organizations. Now, to conclude, India is not a very energy resource rich country. Nuclear power, as compared to coal-based thermal power stations, is compact in the sense that it requires lower quantities of fuel in comparison. For instance, 10,000 megawatt electric nuclear power needs 300 to 350 tons of fuel per annum, as against 35 to 50 million tons of coal needed for a coal-fired thermal power station of the same capacity. The pressure on rail port and other infrastructure is immense when large thermal capacity is added, besides the emissions arising out of transporting such large quantities of coal. India's installed power capacity currently stands at 405 gigawatt and is projected to reach 810 gigawatt by 2030. 22 operational nuclear power reactors with a cumulative capacity of 6.8 gigawatt account for about 3% of India's energy mix. India's commitments at the COP26 summit to install 500 gigawatt of non-fossil energy capacity by 2030, reduce the amount of carbon emissions by 1 billion tons by 2030, achieve net zero targets by 2070, and meeting 50% of energy requirements with renewable energy by 2030 have renewed the focus on India's nuclear sector. Aside from the 22 operational reactors with aggregate capacity of 6,780 megawatt, India is constructing another 11 nuclear power plants with a cumulative capacity of 8,700 megawatt, including a prototype 500 megawatt fast breeder reactor and 4 pressurized water reactors of 1,000 megawatt each in cooperation with Rosatom, Russian State Nuclear Energy Agency. The government has sanctioned another 10 indigenous pressurized heavy water reactors of 700 megawatt capacity, each setting the stage for higher capacities by the target date of 2030. Climate change arising out of greenhouse gas emissions is among the most important challenges facing the world today. The effects of climate changes are expected to be catastrophic, which can be witnessed now already with crop losses, sea level rise, and extreme weather events. Nuclear power is environmentally benign, and the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions of nuclear power are comparable to that of wind and solar photovoltaic power. Thus, nuclear power is considered to contribute significantly in decarbonizing the power sector and arresting climate change. Thank you very much for joining and listening to my presentation. I look forward to the questions and the discussion.
Thank you very much, Pallavi. That was very clear. Yes, really interesting and fascinating, all of your presentations. I think we'll have a very good discussion about it. I only see so far one question in the chat from the audience, but I would very much encourage everyone to ask questions. I know this is quite a rich topic, so it's quite difficult to fit everything into these short presentations. I will maybe reserve the right to start out with a question of mine, and I was just wondering what out of all of the questions that I would like to ask, what I should start with. But I think in some ways all of you maybe somehow at least somehow came to the topic of at least national interest and perhaps also then national security. So I thought if you could all comment on your perspective on to what extent is this whole energy, overall maybe energy and especially energy transition, and perhaps from your all points of view, to what extent is it a national security issue and discussed as a national security issue in India? I will perhaps let Dhanasree go first.
Yeah, okay. So energy is definitely a national security issue in India. And I think from all the presentations made here, these aspects of how energy is related to the national interest and security perceptions is something that is very clear. And I think especially if you look at India's energy dependence, even on coal for a long time, until recently, in fact, India was highly dependent on coal imports. It's only in the past couple of years that the coal imports have declined, and there is more emphasis on coal production within the country. But the high quality coal was again coming from Indonesia, Australia, and outside of the country, which is something that the government and various other stakeholders were aware of and something that they were working towards reducing. Oil imports, we all know crude oil imports, something that has been also in the discussion for a long time. Then how do we reduce that dependence? This is where renewable energy sort of comes in as something wherein we can reduce dependence on these energy imports, or something that came up as a solution, sort of, But at the same time, as Ramu was indicating in his presentation, that that for the raw materials, even for renewable energy expansion, we need we are dependent on China. We don't have the sufficient amount of processing technologies or extraction technologies that we can use to reduce even that dependence on China. And we know that recently, in fact, India's renewable energy expansion did face certain bottlenecks. And one of the reasons for that was also India imposed customs duties on raw materials imported primarily to target China, because, we know that most of it comes from China, and there is a border conflict, which has also erupted in, very intense conflicts couple of times in the past few years. And with these kind of, issues which are more existential in nature, territorial issues and all of that, India did feel the need to sort of reduce the dependence on China, even on the issue of, critical minerals and import of critical raw materials or process technologies from say China. So this did affect India's own renewable energy expansion in fact, in 2022, when India was supposed to meet a specific target, it could not meet. Of course, COVID also was a major factor. We cannot, ignore the fact that the COVID pandemic did disrupt the supply chains by a great deal. But also this whole de-risking, decoupling kind of, that narrative, which is also very prominent now in Europe, United States, and many other parts of the world. This is also something that is being discussed a lot in India's case. And more policies have been introduced, particularly trying to increase manufacturing within India. There was also a rule that came up which said clearly that, any renewable energy manufacturers should supply their raw materials from within India, from a list that was, specifically issued by the ministry. All of those different measures also did kind of, affect the renewable energy targets. But however, the mood is upbeat still. There is a clear belief that the 2030 targets can be met despite these small glitches that we have seen in the past couple of years. So yes, so national interest and national security are deeply embedded in the energy discussions, and even climate discussions for that matter, because all these issues are in the end they are intertwined with each other. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a very very profound answer. Would Ramu, you like to add something?
Yeah, so I think Dhanashree has actually explained enough. But maybe where I would try to be more to be clearer is energy security. For that matter, energy, be it in terms of a processed commodity, a fuel, or even electricity, is an important topic, a theme in the national discourse, not just in terms of government, the policy elites, but also in terms of public opinion. It's a topic that actually even I wouldn't say dominate, but it's part of election manifestos. Even it's a part of like the ever changing cycle of political expediency. The 5-term like governments that come and go. However, when we talk about the energy transition, I mean, in terms of okay, let's leave aside environmental security, but in terms of climate change and being climate change driving the energy transition, I would say there is an awareness, and there is a whole lot of upgradation of the discourse in the national level, as well as even in the polity levels in subnational actors. But if you look at public opinion, it is definitely not like the the OECD countries. It's still people. It's still mostly like relegated to subnational entities, spin-offs, NGOs, non-profits, and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, so energy is still, I mean, because even if you look at India's liberalization reforms, that actually started in the early 90s, exactly around 1991. And that was triggered mostly by a current account deficit crisis. And that current account deficit crisis, the biggest trigger factor was India's excessive oil imports. And that has always been a major handicap. So, and oil is, again, like it's a fossil fuel commodity. So in the petroleum sector, India is relatively more like self-reliant when it comes to natural gas than oil. But in terms of renewable energies, yes, India has boasted a very enviable renewable energy generation capacity. But in terms of translating it into net energy access. The net energy demand is obviously high because the industry is developing, but in terms of net energy access, there are still a lot of different strata in India, like which are divided across this wide, like demographic and geographic dividend, which still don't have access to this, like this energy or electricity. So building transmission infrastructure, which the government is doing with its own scheme. I mean, they have this scheme called the Ujjwala project. It's taking place, but still it needs more investments. It needs more infrastructure. And even in terms of, like creating an equitable energy demand, that is still not taking place in India. It's mostly the big industry that is actually like driving this demand. So yeah, that's what my take would be like. Yeah, I mean, in terms of in terms of strictly energy, yes, it is a huge national security issue. But in terms of energy transition, climate change driven energy transition, it still needs to evolve.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Very good additions. Pallavi, would you like to add something from the nuclear side or in general?
I'll quickly just say, because I see some questions are, so, and also I think Dhanashree and Ramu have said it very nicely. I'll just quickly point out to the fact that the very fact that we have a sort of legally binding Paris Agreement kind of shows that energy is not just a national security issue of India, but like everywhere it's a national security issue, which is undoubtedly, I think it's given, and it should be, because energy is essential for everything. There are two aspects with regard to that I would talk about, which are a national security concern. One is the technology reliance on foreign countries, and the second is the financial. And there is one way in which the discussions have been going on, at least, is that the way it has been tried to address in the nuclear power plant is that the spent nuclear fuel is reprocessed and reprocessed. And the second one is now they are trying, which has been going on for quite a long time, to have thorium, and because India has a lot of thorium reserves, but not uranium. So mostly just so the technology money and the spent fuel being reprocessed and thorium. So these are some of my points about the national security aspect.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm very satisfied with those answers. We can then go to the chat because we have several very good questions there. First of all, I guess this is for everyone to comment relatively, maybe shortly, but how green is the transition process, considering that it also involves mining and extraction? Maybe I'll give the floor first to Ramu.
I would be frank and honest here. There is no silver bullet. It's not perfectly green. And to decarbonize the entire supply chain is a Herculean effort. And in terms of mining earth-moving machinery, no, as far as I know, like it's still operated with diesel and, like fossil fuels. So there is no, in terms of like transport, heavy transport and earth-moving machinery, I really don't know if we can actually substitute with EVs or hydrogen, like fuel cells. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. I mean, it's still needs to be experimented, and even some of those things are still pilot projects. I mean, to commercialize and to achieve economies of scale, it will take years. I mean, and this is not just in terms of India. It's an international problem. Like even in the most developed countries with the like the best mining expertise, you have not been able to like completely decarbonize the critical mineral supply chain, which is essential for building most of these renewable energy technologies. So yeah, that's it.
Yes. Pallavi and Dhanashree, do you want to add something?
Not really. I just wanted to say that, just maybe quickly that if you look at the extractive technologies and how sustainable they are and the practices in general, there's been a push, over a period of time, we have seen there is a push for more sustainability safeguards, and also reaching a sort of agreement on how different companies, and because there is a lot of private players who are also involved in these. So there needs to be more regulatory oversight on how private companies or players are also involved in these extractive projects. And so the governments at the countries where the extraction is happening. They are mostly the global south right now. They are mostly like, developing, least developed countries, including like, DRC and many other countries have seen the socio-environmental effects of mining. And it has also been, connected or linked with conflicts, and also how human security has been affected in some of these places. So, again, in places like in India, we have something called the district funds, which is also looking at how where the mining is taking place. Some investments are also, going into development, or maybe hospitals, schools, jobs, creation of jobs. So, so there are these different kind of district mineral foundations and various other initiatives, like in India and many other parts of the world, which can help with some of these sustainability standards being met. But we know that, as Ramu said, it's still a long way to go when it comes to making the entire process green. And I don't think that is going to become a reality anytime soon.
Yes. Yeah, I will maybe, Palvi, if you want to say something to that, you can continue on that note. But there are actually two questions for you also about the nuclear power plants. Basically, just is it possible to build them quickly enough to address the needs that there are?
Yeah, that's a very sort of relevant, and it's a very newly relevant question about the possibility of building nuclear power plants quickly enough. So just one sentence about the minerals thing, which is that with the nuclear power plant, the reliance on these critical minerals is very low. So that is another reason why it is being promoted as being alternative to or going side by side with the renewable energy. Now, about this nuclear power plant being quickly built, it is true that it takes years to build it. There is a lot of bureaucracy. Now, what the countries are coming up with is small modular reactors. It's SMRs, and it's a very new thing. For instance, a lot of these countries in what can be called the global south, they are procuring, or they are procuring technologies for, or seeking the help from the technology export countries to build the small modular reactors. And this is considered to be one of the solution, and it is also happening in India as well. But with India, because India has some of the already existing technology, it is happening parallelly with the pressurized heavy water reactors and light water reactors. And then we have the SMRs. The another question I'm not, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's kind of the same.
Is it okay if I answer, but is it okay if I quickly answer this, or?
Yes,
Okay.
Sure.
So the construction of the new plants with regard to nuclear power plants, the sort of given is that there are always delays, especially within a democratic setting, because there are opposition groups, and there are also discussions, even though it forms within the purview of the government. And with regard to the delay and like comparison to Europe, the difference, I think, which relates to the energy crisis currently, as we all know, the geopolitics which Ramu spoke about, Europe had heavy dependence on Russian oil and gas. And then because of the Fukushima Daiichi power plant disaster, Germany, for instance, had also gotten rid of its nuclear power plants. Now, not to go into those details, but because we are all aware of it. But with regard to India, India has continued its sort of investment, and it's also being encouraged right now, as by the principal security advisor has just submitted the report. So it can be expected that it would be encouraged to have more nuclear power plant construction. And there are already 22 power plants existing, which doesn't provide that much electricity, but it's like something like 2% to 3%. So the delays are sort of a reality of the nuclear power plants. However, it kind of seems like an essential energy source, considering the current ongoing energy crisis within India.
Okay, great. Thank you. Since we're almost running out of time, I would still quickly ask you to give your kind of final statements, but specifically for Ramu, if you can comment on this, whether India has the potential to become a net supplier globally in any of the rare earths, quite shortly.
Okay, shortly speaking, I don't see because some of the reserves are underexplored, but these are not rare earth elements per se. I mean, India has good reserves of critical minerals like manganese, molybdenum, mica, and whatnot. But in terms of rare earths, I wouldn't say so. I mean, right now, India recently, like, hit a jackpot when it actually was able to prospect and identify almost nearly 6 million tons of lithium. Again, lithium is not technically rare earth, but it's a very important critical mineral in the frontier state of Jammu and Kashmir. It's in the same mineral belt along the Pamir North Mountains that stretches across all the way to Afghanistan. But extracting from politically sensitive geography would require its own, it will take its own sweet time. And to establish the requisite supply and value chain will take even more years to come. So I would say that, no, I mean, I don't want to be that ambitious. It won't be able to become a global leader in that form. I mean, like the way the Chinese companies bided their time and were able to do it in the last 30 years. Since the Indian industry, the industry in general is growing at a rapid pace, and it is also one of the biggest consumers and emitters of emissions, its posture will be something that it's going to be unavoidable in terms of dealing with these critical mineral supply chains. I mean, it will be an integral part, a kind of a cog in the wheel, but I wouldn't put it as a global leader anytime soon.
Okay. Yes. Then very quickly, if you, Dhanasree and Pallavi, still want to say something, some last final thoughts, about 1 minute each. Maybe Dhanasree first.
Yeah, just quickly, I see Marco has put this question about finance and technology, and I think these are the main issues that continue to remain as a huge bottleneck in this global north, global south, or whatever, that cooperation between EU and India or US and India. Even though, India does prefer to cooperate with these countries when it comes to energy and climate issues, it's very clear that, on technology particularly, there is a lot of synergy that is being built. But finance is a big issue, and this is an issue on which India has been battling a lot of, within the climate change negotiations. I mean, India has clearly said that it requires around $100 billion to achieve the net zero target, particularly in respect to investments in renewable energy. And like last year and the year before that, it did reach maybe like 1 billion, 1.6 billion, around that much US dollars. And that is still not close to what India requires to actually achieve this, even the 2030 target that it's talking about. So a lot of revenues, is still coming from the government, the domestically generated sort of, budgetary allocation that is being done. That is what is helping India achieve some of these targets. So that is something important. And even on technology, I mean, not necessarily, of course, there is not enough technology transfer happening, that we all know. Compared to what is the expectation, but also there are, these sort of imminent sort of disputes when it comes to like WTO disputes on domestic requirements, which is something that the US raised against India on the, against the national solar mission of India, in which again India had, put certain requirements. And India had also similarly sort of filed a case against the United States companies on, the subsidies and everything. So these are going to be a major concern, even when, companies or, industries, solar energy or other industries are collaborating across borders as well.
Okay, thank you, Dhanasree. And then finally, Pallavi, 1 minute.
I know. Yes, I know we have run out of time, so I will just need 1 minute, and it would deal with the delays. it kind of occurred to me that with regard to the cooperation with USA and France, there has been not only delays, but the fallout of the cooperation. So the only existing cooperation right now between India with regard to nuclear technology import is Rosatom, the Russian state nuclear energy agency. It is also kind of providing the or rather the technology development with regard to India in terms of nuclear power has been what I had already mentioned about the spent nuclear fuel. So it no longer sends the spent nuclear fuel back. So that is one of the development that India has tried to do technologically, which it actually is kind of, I think in NPCIL, it's a very, they mention it with pride. So to put it like that. So that's all I think from me.
Thank you. This has been really interesting, and we could have clearly continued with the discussion for a very long time, but unfortunately this is a short webinar, and hopefully we'll have the chance to continue the discussion in some other format. So on behalf of FIIA and the Energy Transition Project and the Spotlight webinar series, I would like to thank, first of all of our great speakers. Thank you. And thank you also for the audience for listening and giving great questions. So that's it. Thank you from me, and see you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Yeah. Bye-bye.